150 years ago, a man born to privilege in eastern Kentucky decided that instead of following in his father's footsteps practicing law, he'd simply break the law instead. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and in this episode we tell the tale of a Kentucky boy who became a notorious stagecoach bandit in the Wild West. Another one of the stories of Appalachia.
Yeah, this is a fascinating story, too, about how this young man decided he wanted to break out of the mold of what his father, I guess, probably intended for him to do in the first place. And he breaks out of the mold, and instead of practicing law, he decides to go and break the law in another way of putting it.
Well, life dealt him some lemons, I do believe,
True.
and that's what caused him to go down that path. Although I think that he probably preferred to do that than sitting in a dusty, dry old law office studying law books, don't you think?
I would say so too. Life was probably a little more exciting on the outside than being in a law office.
Indeed it was. Now, folks, if you're wondering, we're talking about a fella that was born George Brittain Lyttle in Clay County, Kentucky back in 1845. His parents, David and Drusilla Lyttle, gave him everything they thought he'd need to succeed in life. You see, David Lyttle was a prominent attorney and a judge, and he did everything he could to provide George with the best education, hoping his son would follow in his own illustrious footsteps. In 1850, the Littles moved to Harlan County, where David opened another law office. Dad's plans were proceeding as expected until the war between the states happened, throwing a kink into David's plans for young George.
And a big kink it was too, Steve, because when the Civil War started, Kentucky tried to stay neutral, but the state was divided. George, who was in his late teens, chose his side of, well, you guess wherever he wanted to go, and he joined the Kentucky Confederate 10th Mounted Infantry Regiment for a 3-year term. Now, on November 12, 1863, during a battle at, of all places, over in Virginia, Lee County, Jonesville, Virginia, as a part of the Confederate forces defending against Union troops, George was captured and then sent to Camp Chase in Cincinnati as a prisoner of war. He was paroled home to Harlan in December of 1863 after promising, well, yeah, that's funny, promising not to fight against the Union again. Well, back in Harlan County, George spent his time the rest of the war working for his father and studying law, eventually being admitted to the Kentucky bar. But, you know, those good times, like with everything else, those good times didn't last, did they, Steve?
They did not, for as the Civil War drew to a close in 1865, George's mother passed away, and he was devastated. He turned to excessive drink and became, an embarrassment to his family and friends. Realizing he couldn't live up to his father's expectations, George decided to just get out of town and leave eastern Kentucky. He disappeared without a trace, not telling anybody about his new life. By 1868, George had popped up in, of all places, Los Angeles, California, under a new identity, DickFellows. He tried to start fresh, but continued to struggle with his drinking, as he later admitted, he had become, quote, besotted. I like that word, don't you, Rod?
I do too. I've always wondered where that word "sot" came from. I've said that before. I've even said that about some of my family members. They're a bunch of sots.
Yeah,
well, now I know it comes from this. Okay. All right, let's go on.
Well, and anyway, in Los Angeles, Dick and a friend came up with a plan. They decided to start a hog farm to supply meat to the city, feeding the animals on federal rangeland. It was a solid idea, but they were underfunded. So where in the world are we going to get money for that, Dick thinks. Well, Dick came up with an idea. He wanted to rob stagecoaches. And just like that, Rod, his new career was born.
In 1869, Mr. Fellows pulled off 4 or 5 successful stagecoach robberies in the Los Angeles area and the San Fernando Valley, all by himself. Now, here's how he did it. Dick would mask up, step out onto the road in front of an oncoming stagecoach, aim his gun, make the driver stop, and he then ordered the driver to toss the express boxes to the ground and move on. These robberies all happened around dusk, and for a few months, Dick was making good money this way. But then, well, you could say Dick's luck ran out. One night late in 1869, Dick targeted the eastbound stagecoach from San Fernando. Everything started off as usual until a passenger decided to play hero and took a couple of shots at him. Well, in the chaos, Dick's horse took off, leaving him stranded. Luckily, the horse came back after a few minutes and, well, Dick was able to make a quick escape.
Well, Rod, he might have made that quick escape, but by golly, he was determined not to get away empty-handed. He found another stagecoach to rob, but things didn't go smoothly there either. Again, an earnest passenger fired at him, and the driver sped off. But this time, Dick managed to catch up and tried to rob them again. He called out in a loud voice, "Don't shoot, boys, till you get the signal." Thinking they were surrounded by a gang, the driver surrendered $480 without a fight. By now, Dick had attracted the attention of the authorities and had to lay low. He didn't go back to the hog ranch, but instead hid out in the brush along the San Gabriel River until things cooled down. When he finally felt safe enough, he went to a nearby tavern. Unfortunately, the owner there recognized him from his wanted posters, and that owner and two patrons cornered Dick while he was eating, with the owner holding a pistol on him.
Well, suddenly, Dick knocked the gun out of the owner's hand and he bolted for the door. He was just in time to get hit in the foot by a shot when the gun hit the floor. Wounded, Dick mounted his horse and rode off to a farmhouse, claiming he'd been shot in a brawl at a dance the night before. Must have been some dance, I can tell you that much. A doctor was called to treat his wound. Well, meanwhile, a posse was hot on his trail, having gotten information from the tavern owner. They tracked him to the farmhouse, and realizing he couldn't escape with his injured foot, Dick surrendered. DickFellows was convicted of robbery and sentenced to 8 years in San Quentin prison.
But folks, we're not done. For on April 4th, 1874, DickFellows got a break. The governor of California pardoned him, and he was released from San Quentin prison. Dick tried to turn over a new leaf, but once again, he couldn't shake his old ways. In November 1875, Dick heard a rumor about a Wells Fargo stagecoach carrying a special delivery. He made his way to Caliente, California, and watched as a Wells Fargo detective, James Hume, and 4 guards loaded $240,000 worth of gold coins from a train to a stagecoach bound for Los Angeles. This was the big score Dick had been dreaming of. And Rod, I didn't look this up, but $240,000 back then had to have been a heck of a lot of money today.
Oh, yeah. Had to be.
And all gold, so it's heavy, too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as the stagecoach left Caliente, Dick hopped on his horse and followed. His plan was simple: ride ahead, set up an ambush, and make off with the gold. But his horse had other ideas. Just a few minutes into the ride, the horse threw Dick off and bolted back to the stables in Caliente. Dick's golden opportunity literally ran away from him, and the stagecoach continued on to Los Angeles without a hitch.
Well, not one to give up easily, Dick decided to target the stagecoach on its return trip, hoping there might still be valuables on board. Well, this time he rented a horse in Bakersfield and waited for the stagecoach. This time things seemed to go smoothly. The coach threw down a box, and Dick eagerly went to retrieve it. But as he struggled to load the heavy box onto his horse, the animal spooked, causing the box to fall on Dick's foot and injure it. This almost sounds like a comedy of errors here. Well, the horse ran off back to the stables in Bakersfield, done with the man in that massive box, leaving good old Dick stranded with a busted foot and no way to transport his loot. Well, determined to salvage something, old Dick dragged the box into the brush. In the dark, he stepped off a cliff, and then, of all things, he fell 12 feet onto a railroad track tunnel, breaking his leg in the process, among other things. Well, despite his injuries, he continued to drag himself and the box into hiding. 2 nights later, desperate and in pain, he crawled to a construction camp, hoping to find tools to open the box and some food. Using an axe, he finally broke it open and found $1,800 inside. Well, better something than nothing in there, I guess. So he then made some crude crutches, hobbled to a nearby farm where he, well, once again, he stole a horse and he stole a saddle. Well, Dick's luck didn't last. As a matter of fact, it was starting to run out. He was tracked down and captured on January 9th, 1876, under the name now of Richard Perkins. He was convicted of armed robbery and sent back to San Quentin. Though he managed a brief escape, he was quickly recaptured and returned to prison. This time, he served 5 years of his 8-year sentence before being paroled, and Dick was just plain Dick out of luck.
And Dick became a newspaper solicitor, Rod, in Santa Cruz. And, of all things, he taught Spanish to students under his real name, George Little. But the demon whiskey, that alcohol, defeated him yet again, and he went back to, robbing stagecoaches. In July and August of 1881, he robbed a series of stagecoaches. He was suspected, and on January 27, 1882, he was again captured, but escaped again as he was being transported to jail. He was captured for good on February 4th, 1882, and sentenced to life in prison at Folsom Prison as a habitual criminal on March 27th, 1882. But wait, we're still not done. No, not yet anyway. You see, while in jail awaiting delivery to Folsom, DickFellows managed to charm the jailer into getting close enough to him for Fellows to get a hold of his gun. He took the pistol and put the jailer into the cell, then took off down the street. He didn't make it very far and was recaptured after trying to steal a horse a few blocks away. The horse bucked and threw him into the street, which is where he sat stunned until he was arrested once again. Rod, horses apparently did not have a thing for DickFellows.
Probably all well and good at that case. Well, they sent Mr. Fellows on down to Folsom. You know, Stuck in Folsom Prison, that song. Okay. Where he entered on April 6th, 1882 as prisoner number 470. Well, by this time, his relatives in Kentucky had, of all things, they'd figured out where he was. So they bombarded the Kentucky governor with petitions to get old Dick, George, whatever he was called, released by the California governor. Finally, on March 9th, 1908, took him a little while, they succeeded, and he was released on a pardon from the governor of California on the condition he returned to Kentucky with them. Well, that he did. Then he disappeared. Some say that he took off from Mexico to continue his outlaw ways, but nobody, even to this day, knows for sure whatever happened to DickFellows, George Little, whatever you want to call him. Wow.
That is a man with an amazing story and the biggest string of bad luck I think I have ever seen. My goodness.
Wow. Jumping 12 feet, landed on the railroad tracks.
Yep.
Wow.
Have his horse drop his big old box full of gold on his foot. Horse bucks him. Horse runs off from him. I mean, the unluckiest outlaw ever, I believe, straight out of eastern Kentucky.
Wow. He was just Dick out of luck, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, Rod. Yes, he was. And that, folks, is the story of a promising eastern Kentucky youth turned outlaw, DickFellows. Another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to the Stories Podcast in a whole bunch of ways. Obviously, here on YouTube at clicking that subscribe button. giving us a like, what have you. Also at Apple Podcasts if you like the audio version, Spreaker, Spotify, Player FM, or on your favorite podcast app. Again, thanks for listening. Till next time, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.